Prologue. Would you like some more coffee, sir? Dr. Nixon McConnell, or Nix, as most called him, sat looking deep into the fire. So deep, in fact, that he didn't even register that his assistant had even asked him a question. No, his thoughts strayed to a place far away from his present location. It was a place where a man goes when he is alone with his quiet thoughts. A place where the hidden person of the heart will come out for adolescent dreaming and the occasional play. "Sir?" asked Frank. "Huh? What was that?" said Nix, as he was roused from his reverie. With an exaggerated wide-eyed look on his face, he realized that, while his prefrontal cortex hadn't listened to the original question, his brain had still heard it. Recognizing the question now, he responded, "Oh, sorry. Yeah, here you go." Extending his cup toward his assistant, Nix felt the weight of the warm brew as it poured. "Thanks," said Nix, as his lips once again tasted the bitter but somehow satisfying liquid. For his part, Frank had noticed that his boss was uncharacteristically quiet this morning. It was actually a wonder that you could detect anything that was quiet in this cacophony of rainforest. They had come here to the island of New Caledonia about 7 weeks ago, and it must have taken a full week before either of them could get any sleep. Neither of the men were unfamiliar with sleeping in tents and waking up to a breakfast served around a campfire, but somehow the other times they had respectively camped out under the stars, it just seemed quiet, at least for Frank. Nix seemed unfazed by it, though. To call Nix his boss was, while technically accurate, more of a misnomer. That is, if you were to judge from the way Nix treated his associate. True, when he was hired to go on this research trip to study a specific species of intelligent crow only found on this island, his stated duties would be to maintain the camp, provide cooked meals, and assist in any other way that Nix deemed appropriate to accomplish his goals. Those goals, by the way, were to study this species of crow, and to see if there were any environmental influences that caused an enhanced intelligence. Or maybe it was the isolation in this part of the world. The population of crows was evidently large enough to support appropriate genetic diversity in the species, which was one of the first observations that Nix had made. As a rather well-known biologist and genetic researcher from MIT, this, of course, was one of the first questions he had to answer upon getting to the island. Once again, Frank took note of the demeanor of his boss and wondered to himself, where was he this morning? It certainly wasn't anywhere on this island right now. "What's up, boss?" asked Frank. Looking over to his assistant, Nix once again smiled at the notion that not much had missed Frank's notice. "Oh," a smile broke out on his face as he responded, "I was just thinking about Emma." Emma Elise Wesson was Nix's fiancée, and she was still living back in Cambridge. He was hopelessly in love with her, and she was completely smitten with him. Lately, he had to work hard not to waste the day away daydreaming about her. Frank smiled. He knew how in love Nix was with Emma. It had been a regular subject of their evening discussions around the fire. "Well," said Frank as he smiled a wide, toothy grin, "unless the purveyors of your grant money are just as enamored with your lady love, I suggest you and I get to it this morning." "Yes, sir," said Nix, with a magnanimous salute and a fake bucktooth grin. They had truly become good friends. Gathering up their things to be packed away and hanging up the foodstuffs from a rope dangling from a tree, the two made short order of their morning chores in preparation for going back to the lagoon. That lagoon was, in fact, something that neither of the men had to be coerced to visit. Shortly after arriving on the island, and after making the trek to this part of the island where some of the indigenous people said a lot of the crows that they were studying lived, they happened upon a lagoon where the birds seemed to congregate. After talking to some of the locals for a while, some of the older men said they were aware of the lagoon, and they even believed it was where some of the spirits of their dead ancestors lived. They said that the spirits came out at night and danced in the water, and, in fact, some considered the crows to be the embodiment of their ancestors. As a result, their visit was met with quite a lot of resistance from the locals. It was only after the researchers had assured all involved that their interest was only in observation and that they would cause no harm to the birds that the islanders agreed to allow the visitors to stay. Secretly, Nix had intended to take genetic samples back with him to Cambridge, and he especially had hoped to take a living male and female bird back with him. At this point, though, he didn't quite know how he was going to pull that off. While the village elders had agreed to let him stay and do his observations, still, Nix and Frank observed that there was always a villager or two popping up out of the blue, as if to check on what the good doctor was up to. He had the feeling that he wasn't completely trusted. Meanwhile, Nix and Frank made their way from the campsite and began their trek across the small oval-shaped valley. They were camped on one end of the valley. However, much of their attention focused on an area way over on the other end, where a waterfall emptied into a lagoon, whose beauty regularly took their breath away. One time, Frank observed that its color wasn't unlike another lagoon he had visited in the Philippines, named Kawasan Falls. The pooling of water underneath the falls took on a pale blue-green color, and looked as if it had been colorized by a cartoon artist. The surreal beauty was breathtaking to behold, but in fact was only half of the mystery. Almost 5 weeks ago, Nix and Frank came to the lagoon at night to see if the activity level of the animals was any different than what they had observed during the day. That was when they were astonished to discover that the rocks in and around the entire area actually glowed with the same color as was seen during the day. Initially, he theorized that there must be some sort of phosphorescent algae adhering to the rocks, but he later discovered that even the rocks with no algae glowed with the same blue-green hue. Frank had voiced concern that maybe the rocks were naturally radioactive, but that was quickly disproved. Nix was truly perplexed, and since he wasn't a trained geologist, he was, after all, a biologist and genetic researcher, he sent samples of the water, algae, mud, and rocks back to his alma mater, and asked that they try to identify this mineral that he had discovered. He didn't know it at the time, but his use of the word discover would work quite well in his favor. It only took about 40 minutes to arrive at the observation site today, only to discover that their main observation point was now occupied by an uninvited guest. Arriving with their normal stealth, so as to not startle the population of crows that lived here, they soon realized that this guest, who appeared rather pudgy and not well suited for field work like this, was already there, and had sufficiently and loudly disrupted the peace of the flock. Rather annoyed at the flagrant disregard for their work, Nix approached the intruder, who at the time was crouched down near the edge of the water, and who was facing away from Nix. "Can I help you?" With a decent modicum of effort, the man stood up and turned around, and it was only now that Nix recognized the man to be Dr. John Siegel, who was the head of the Materials Sciences Lab where Nix had sent the samples.
"Dr. McConnell,
said the out-of-shape, yet well-appointed man.
"Mighty fine-looking piece of water you have here. How has your research been going, Doctor?"
Dr. Siegel often went by the name Dr. Livingston, since his full name was actually Jonathan Livingston Siegel, named by his parents after a favorite book of theirs. "Dr. Livingston, I presume?" said Nix. He then added, "Well, it probably would have been a little better had you not scared away the subjects of my study here, Doctor," said Nix with a mild edge to his voice. "It will probably mean this day will be a wash, as far as observing the crows I came here to study."
"Well, I apologize for that, Doctor,"
said the contrite man.
"but I had hoped to catch you, and I didn't know where you would be camping. I would have gone there instead."
"We chose to camp far away from this area, because we didn't want our presence to influence the behavior of our test subjects." Then, gesturing to a divot in the canyon walls on the other side of the valley where they stood, he then explained, "We are camping about 30 minutes that-a-way, at the bottom of that granite cutout."
"Well, once again I am sorry to disrupt your work here, but I had to come and see the lagoon myself."
Up until now, Nix hadn't really thought about how odd it was that his visitor was here in the field. Aside from the fact that biology wasn't his field of study, it was rather obvious that the good Dr. Siegel wasn't well suited for the humid and decidedly dirty environment that this part of the world offered. As Dr. Siegel had obviously traveled a long way, Nix decided to be conciliatory. Nodding his head, he said, "Apology accepted." Then, cocking his head to the side, he added, "What brings you to my favorite getaway spot?"
"Well, I'd like to explain that to you,"
responded a smiling Dr. Siegel.
"but I was wondering if you might have a place to talk that had a little more refreshment and a little less dirt."
"I think we can mostly work that out, although dirt is a rather normal commodity in this part of the world," responded Nix. Turning to Frank, Nix then said, "Frank, would you hot-footed back to the camp and rustle up some refreshments?" Knowing that the trek back would be slowed by his rotund visitor, he added, "We'll follow behind you and see you there."
"You got it, boss,"
was Frank's quick and smart response. Turning on his heels, the ever-responsive assistant took off toward camp, followed shortly by the two doctors. As expected, it took about twice the normal amount of time to get back to camp. The visiting doctor wasn't really in the mood to talk about the nature of his visit while huffing and puffing through the trek. The walk back to camp involved a slight grade, since the lagoon was about 300 or 400 feet in elevation less than the location where the camp was. Eventually, though, the two men made their way back, and the offering of liquid refreshment was immediately and gratefully accepted. Allowing Dr. Siegel to get his wits about him, Nix took the time to get his things in order. Since he was going to have a rather lackadaisical day due to his visitor, on the way back to the camp he had decided that he would perhaps get some sleep today and return to the lagoon tonight for some nocturnal observations. At least the day wouldn't be a total washout. After a short amount of time, Dr. Siegel spoke up to Nix as he was passing by.
"So, Doctor, I know that your complete first name is Nixon. I don't think I've ever heard of that name being used before, at least as a first name."
Then, seeing that this may have been received as a jibe, he added,
"I like it, mind you. I think it sounds sophisticated."
Nix had had this particular conversation with people over the years countless times, and didn't really relish having it once more, although this may have been the first time that someone thought it sounded sophisticated. "Well, I was born in 1974 during the whole Watergate debacle," replied Nix, "and my parents, being staunch Republicans, decided that they would name me after the president to show their support."
Oh, really?
said Dr. Siegel with a raised eyebrow.
And how do you feel about that?
Taking a seat near his visitor and looking into the unlit fire pit, Nix looked like he was choosing his words carefully, which, by the way, he wasn't. He just knew that he needed to show that his words were well thought out. They were, in fact. He had just arrived at these particular conclusions about 30 years prior. Well, you see, replied Nix, while the things President Nixon did in his earlier career were really great, such as the forming of alliances with China and the effect that had on the creation of détente between the United States and the Soviet Union, Nix paused. Still, the involvement he had with the Watergate scandal really marred my opinion of the man. I've always subscribed to the motto, you know the right thing to do, so just do it. For that reason, I rarely go by my full first name.
I can understand that,
conceded Dr. Siegel.
I'm a Democrat myself, but I remember feeling like there was a real black eye put on the overall credibility of the engine of politics. It was bigger than just a partisan thing.
The two men stared at the coals that were remnants from the morning fire. Being the middle of the day, the fire wouldn't be needed until later tonight when the meal was to be cooked. After a short amount of time, Nix spoke. Knowing the answer already, but wanting to be courteous, he asked, You make it out into the field to do research much? The ensuing snort from his visitor revealed that his veiled courtesy was not very well disguised. Thinking how badly he had fared in the simple walk back to the camp, Dr. Siegel replied,
I think the answer to that question is rather obvious.
Then with an open-handed slap to his belly, and with enlarged eyes, he added,
Wouldn't you say?
Seeing that he had been caught, and seeing the self-deprecating humor of his guest, Nix immediately broke out in laughter, which of course was accompanied by Dr. Siegel, as well as by Frank, who was bringing a paper plate with various crackers and cheese for the men to snack on. The laughter had broken the last vestiges of ill regard on Nix's part, and the three men now enjoyed a short bout of relaxed conversation, until Dr. Siegel brought the conversation back to a more serious-minded subject.
Honestly, though, I came here to talk to you more about the samples you sent back to my lab.
Scrunching his eyebrows together, Nix thought for a moment. He had actually forgotten about the samples he had sent 5 or 6 weeks ago, and had the doctor not mentioned it now, he probably wouldn't have given it much more thought. The samples? Oh, that's right. Those probably ended up as paperweights on your desk, didn't they?
Not exactly,
replied the doctor enigmatically. Oh?
No. Oh, the water and algae samples were sent to the bio departments for analysis, and the last I heard they didn't find much more than...
Dr. Siegel paused for a moment while he pulled a slip of paper from his shirt pocket, containing the names of the species that he knew Nix would be interested in.
Charophyta and Spirogyra species.
Nix nodded, instantly recognizing the species and registering that they were exactly what he had thought it would be.
Still, though,
continued Dr. Siegel,
the rock samples came to my desk, and I have to tell you, they are really causing a stir.
A stir?
Indeed. Dr. McConnell, are you familiar at all with the periodic table of elements?
Not really. My work doesn't have much call for the regular use of it.
Well, my boy,
said the older gentleman,
trust me, you are going to be getting very used to it now.
Oh? And why is that? Asked an intrigued Nix.
Okay, so a little background here,
said Dr. Siegel. Gesticulating his hands in the air, he proceeded to draw on an imaginary blackboard.
You see, back in the late 1860s, A Russian chemist named Dmitry Mendeleev first published the table based on a bunch of observations that he had made. It was a tabular arrangement of all chemical elements known at the time, and they were ordered by their atomic number, electron configurations, and recurring chemical properties. The ordering showed periodic trends, such as elements with similar behavior in the same column. Overall, the elements on the left are metals, whereas non-metals, such as the noble gases, argon, neon, and the like, are on the right. The groupings in the table show the relationships the elements have with each other, and due to the arrangement of the elements, chemists such as myself are able to predict the behavior of elements based on the proton, neutron, electron configuration, even though we may not have run across those particular elements yet. Follow me so far?
Yep, replied Nix. Some of this was coming back to him from his chemistry courses when he was in college.
Okay, so up to this point, we haven't been able to observe elements much past atomic number 118, named oganesson. Even then, it has to be synthesized in the lab, and the non-isotope version of it only lives for around 0.7 milliseconds before it decays into simpler elements. Still, though, we are able to calculate and predict that sitting out there at atomic number 126 would be an element that is what we have always referred to as an island of stability. We didn't know exactly what the properties of that element would be, but we could predict that the trend of increasing instability of elements farther up the table would halt once we made it to 126. The kicker, though, is that we have never been able to prove if an element of that atomic number was actually stable, since it has never been discovered, or even synthesized.
Oh, I see, said Nix.
That is, until now,
said Dr. Siegel, with a rather large smile on his face. What do you mean?
Well, my good man, that sample you sent me turned out to be the prodigal child of the periodic table of elements. That sample turned out to be the elusive element 126.
Now it was Nix's turn to have the wide eyes. Really?
Yes, and that's not even the half of it,
responded Siegel.
We started doing some testing on the element, and it has properties that are completely rewriting the textbooks. Once we reported the results of our tests to the senior leadership at the Institute, the president, chancellor, and vice president for research essentially demanded I get myself down here to find the man responsible for the discovery of the newest entry in the periodic table of elements.
Then, with a pause to enunciate the seriousness of his words, he added,
which we have named Cornelium, in your honor. Not only that, due to this, it is generally accepted among my contemporaries that your discovery will assure you a Nobel Peace Prize.
At this point, the muscles in Nix's face lost all control, and his mouth gaped. In a bit of comic relief, Frank unintentionally dropped the plate he was holding, and his cheese and crackers went flying across the ground near the feet of the men. For his part, Nix was having a difficult time finding his voice, but eventually said the first thing that came to his mind, which he instantly regretted since it sounded so lame. You're kidding.
No, not kidding. But I think you'll find what the element can do even more amazing.
Looking at the cold coals in the fire pit, Nix said, How could that be more amazing?
Well, the element by itself doesn't really do much. But when you mix it with a few other elements and add some electricity,
Dr. Siegel paused.
It repels gravity and floats in midair.
Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.